Corwin. Many of you know me. I've been here almost as long as Bill. I will be talking about Docker and putting a Java app in a Docker container and doing all that with Maven. I do want to say that I volunteered for this before I found out that Paul was bringing in an expert. So I'm just going to talk about how I did this a couple months ago when I did it for work. So I'll start with a background. So in case you're not familiar, just what is Docker? It's a way to build and run containers, and a container is this thing that's sort of halfway between a native app and running inside a virtual machine. You've got a level of isolation, but you are still using the same kernel as the host, so you're not as heavyweight as a full-blown VM. But you already do have a separate file system and environment variables and everything else, which is nice, but also means you'll need to share directories or you need to run bash in your container to see the log files. From a developer's perspective, the most important thing about Docker is it's a way to package an app and all its dependencies into one big file and just ship that file around. So, for example, you might use Java 11 inside your container. You don't need anybody to install anything or approve it because it's inside your container. And it is a way for developers to run the same configuration as QA in production because you just ship the container and just the environment-specific settings have to change. Now, if you're like me, Java developers may not seem like that big a win. I mean, I need Java, I need a Tomcat, I need a WAR file. It's not that complicated. When I started this, I also needed to get RabbitMQ installed. RabbitMQ is a messaging system. It's written in Erlang, and so it needs itself, it needs an Erlang runtime, it needs these other dependencies, SOCAT and whatnot. And this page just goes on. I never did find out what Vindray actually was, because I discovered that since I'd installed Docker, I could take advantage of somebody else did all the hard work, and there's a Docker image that has all this stuff. And so this is the entire thing I did to install RabbitMQ on my machine. You've got a 3-line file, and really all you need is the top one. It says, give me RabbitMQ. Colon management says, give me the flavor that has the management interface enabled, so you can hit it with a web UI. And then I just have to tell it what ports to expose. So after that was running, then to build an image, I'm going kind of fast here because of the time. To build an image, like I said, you need to get everything you need to run your application. And then since we're doing Java and I said a Maven build, you need a plugin. There are at least 3 Maven plugins for Docker. I went with Fabricate because it had good documentation and it was working with Java 10, which is still fairly new at the time. And the other thing you need is you need Docker configured to run without sudo. I came to the conclusion that I either had to have Docker run without sudo or I had to run all my Maven builds with sudo, and this was the lesser of the 2 evils. So then for a demo, I'm going to be running actually 3 containers. There's one with RabbitMQ, there's an app that sends a message, and then there's a receiver app that listens and prints them so that you can actually see it and believe that it all works. And so now I am probably going to spend a bunch of time getting things on the right screen.
The code's on the screen.
Yeah, that comes later. So this window here should be on that screen. Yeah, okay. I'm going to turn a little bit sideways, or this is just going to get ridiculous. So, oh, that's the first place I had, and Paul started throwing numbers at me. So really the purpose of this window is to run RabbitMQ. And it's this Docker compose command that takes that little file that I showed you earlier and runs it. And it's the same command whether you're installing or you're running it every time. First time this goes out over the internet, downloads a bunch of stuff, takes a little while. Every time after that, it's pretty darn quick. And boom, there's RabbitMQ. It's up and running in a Docker container. So then the next step is the receiver. And this is a simple Spring Boot Java app. It's a Maven build, so we must always just do Maven clean install and let that run. When it gets to the part about the Docker plugin, I have verbose set. That's why all that gray stuff comes up. And if you can see it, you can see it has using cache. We'll see later that there's a bunch of stuff that it does, and it pulls it out of the file. It doesn't have to download it every time. So actually, let me switch to that right now. Because the way this build works, Docker, oh good, one's on the right screen. So this is a Docker file, and that's like the Docker thing to say how to make a container. If I keep the mouse over there, I can scroll. This is what you call a multi-stage build. It has just 2 stages to it. But the first one is saying from Debian 9, that's a Debian image for Docker. go and get that. Then it's actually grabbing the JDK 10 for Linux, downloading that, and then because this is Java 9 and above, we're using JLink to include just the modules that we know we need. All of that is cached, so that only happens the first time unless you were to change something in that section. The second stage here, that's what's actually building my application. And so let me see if I can get this off of that thermostat looking thing. So first it pulls in, it's again running on a Debian instance, and it's pulling in the JDK that it just built. Then it's doing some setup. Then there's a run group tab that's making a user inside the container to run my application. It copies in this launch.sh, I'll get to that in a second, makes it executable. And then it's copying in the receiver-jar.jar, that's my Spring Boot executable jar. And when I copy it in, I drop the version number, that's just so I don't have to change my launch script every time if I cut a new version. And that bottom line is saying to Docker, once you start the container, run this shell script, this launch.sh. And that means that when I start up the container, it will automatically run my application. So let's see, where's launch.sh? Over here. So that shell script, there we go, is not much of a shell script. Java-dash version because I was debugging, and then java-jar and run my springboot.jar. So when I do that, let me think, when I switch back to the Maven build, it should have finished by now. Sorry, I keep losing my mouse pointer every time it goes on that screen. Yeah, so we've successfully done the Maven build. So now we will go and run the Docker image. And this is your typical command, Docker run, the -it makes run interactively in the console so we can see it. And other values come from the Maven POM. So we'll run that, it will fire up, and it will throw a big exception. And I knew it would do that because this is a demo, but why didn't it do that? So yeah, I need another minute, Paul.
Okay. Yeah.
So right here, attempting to connect to localhost 5672. So it's trying to connect to RabbitMQ. It's failing. Well, why is it failing? I just showed you it's running in that other tab. The thing is, this is running inside a Docker container. So it's trying to connect on localhost inside the Docker container. And that doesn't work because RabbitMQ is in its own Docker container. So we will instead, through the magic of Pepper, pull up the command that works. And here I'm passing in, using Spring Boot, I'm passing in an environment variable that says RabbitMQ is really on that 172 IP address. So I start that, and it should fire up and connect. There we go, waiting for messages. And then we'll move over the other one. This one, I'll just run the working version. And this is going to send a message and then exit. And it says it sent a message, and then we went back, and there's the receiver. And so do that once more, a little quicker, and you'll be able to see it actually come in. So there you have it. 3 Docker containers, 2 of them have Java apps. They're all talking to each other.
Yay!